Welcome to the Thor Hour. I'm your host, John Thorhauer. Join me in conversations as I explore the talents, passions, and curiosities from Frederick, Maryland, and beyond. My guest today is Luke Rinehart, a Frederick native and the owner and head instructor at Clinch Academy in Frederick, Maryland. Since beginning his training in 1983 at the age of 5, Luke has earned black belts in Tang Soo Do, self-defense tactics, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Luke has also intensely studied Kenpo, Kickboxing, Muay Thai, as well as other grappling arts outside of BJJ. Both Luke and his wife Katie are also certified life coaches through the John Maxwell team. They recently started a life coaching business, Wellspring Coaching Services. You can get this episode by watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcasting app. I've provided timeline bookmarks in the show notes, so you can quickly and easily navigate the interview. Please see the show notes for the timeline, links to this episode, and guest links. And now, without further ado, Luke Rinehart on the Thor Hour. All right, well, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. I knew when I started thinking about doing the channel, I really thought, oh man, that'd be great if Luke, would want to come on. Since I was a kid, always thought martial arts, just something about it is intriguing to me. Probably not unusual. A lot of people probably feel that way. And so I thought, man, it'd be really great to have somebody like you, and obviously being a local business owner and really being invested in the community. Super excited about it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Yeah. For me, when I first, started thinking about or being more interested in paying attention to martial arts was in probably I think it was the mid-90s maybe. UFC was, I don't know if they were first starting to do their thing, but it was when Hoist Gracie kind of did his thing with UFC. I don't know, we might be similar age, but so you probably remember that when he kind of came on the scene.
Yeah, I mean, that was 1993, and that was a big day.
Yeah. So for me, not being in martial arts or anything, there was a lot of technical things I couldn't see. But the thing that I could see that stuck with me was this guy is doing things very differently, and it was cool. Because it was this guy is not doing these big roundhouse kicks that you see in the movies, right? It looked very different than what you were used to seeing, and yet he was very effective, right? And the one fight that I remember was probably, I guess, a really famous one was with Dan Severn, where he went 16 minutes, I think, and he was kind of underneath him most of the time, which, again, not knowing anything about it, looked very vulnerable, right? But he won. And I remember talking with my pastor at the time, who was really, had a background in martial arts, and I just said, man, that was amazing. How did he do that? And he had a background enough in Jeet Kune Do and some things like that. He kind of talked about it a little bit. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool stuff. And so that, I assume, that was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right?
Yeah.
The Gracie family. Did they kind of bring that into the UFC and into the United States, or where did it come from?
Yeah. Actually, the UFC originally, Rorion Gracie was the founder of that. So Hoist Gracie is the one that fought in the UFC. His older brother Rorion is the one that founded the UFC. Oh, and basically, it was a big marketing thing for what was called at the time Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And so you kind of have Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of came out of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, but that name is held for the Gracie family.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And they're a little different. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in its purest is more very self-defense focused, and that's one of the things that they were proving in the UFC, which is how Gracie Jiu-Jitsu would compete against all these other martial arts styles. Whereas Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, while it looks the same, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions are quite different than, the UFC. There's no striking. It's just all grappling.
And that's more the the sport?
Yeah, more the sportive side. There, you'll see techniques that people are performing in a BJJ tournament, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, that you wouldn't necessarily use in self-defense or in the UFC or anything like that.
Okay. So would you say, well, is there a dominant martial art in UFC today, or is it mix?
I think it's more about the athlete these days.
Okay.
As long as the athlete is obviously training in jiu-jitsu, wrestling, some form of striking, Muay Thai, kickboxing, if they're equipped in all of those arts and all those different levels of martial arts, it becomes a little bit more about the athlete, their training ethics and their athleticism,
their skill set that they just naturally have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huh. Okay. Interesting. So, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a big part of what Clinch Academy does. Not the only thing that they do.
Right.
But reading through some of your biographical information, it was interesting to read that you didn't start with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
You actually started with Tang Soo Do.
Yeah.
Get that right, hopefully. How did that happen? Like, how did that come about? Like, how did you get started?
Yeah, so my father was a black belt in Tang Soo Do, and he was teaching, when I was a child, he was teaching out of our garage. He had our two-car garage just kind of converted into a little home dojo type thing, right? So he used to teach, he was a black belt under Bill Wickham, which is one of the major schools around here at the time, and he taught there a little bit and then kind of just started his own thing out of our home. So as a child, I would see him, teaching people and working out in there, and when I was 5 years old, I kind of jumped in the mix. And
at 5?
Yeah, that's where I started.
Wow. There probably weren't any other 5-year-olds in the mix, right?
Not yet.
That's to come later.
Yeah. It was always a small kind of group of people, intimate,
right.
Martial arts training. So that can be really good because you get a lot of attention and you can learn quickly.
Now, was that a family affair, so to speak, or was it just you participating?
Everybody did at some point, but I'm the one that stuck with it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's pretty cool. And so, all right, so you started with Tang Soo Do. Like, for you personally, how did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu come into the mix for you?
Yeah, so my father was a black belt in Kenpo and Tang Soo Do, and so he kind of taught these traditional martial arts, but he really wanted to find something that was effective for self-defense. He felt that he could use those forms of karate that he was learning, but at the same time knew that there was gaps in it. Most traditional martial arts were created for a purpose that they don't serve today in the same way as far as self-defense. So he came across he had Black Belt magazine, and there was an ad in there for Gracie in Action, which was these videotapes of the Gracie family over the years in like street fights, basically over in Brazil. And, fights out on the beach, fights out on the sidewalk, and again, there was like a marketing tool that they used to show how Gracie Jiu-Jitsu did and performed against other arts in self-defense and or what it used to be called the Gracie Challenge. That was like pre-UFC. The Gracie Challenge, from what I heard, was, you could challenge them to a fight, and if you won, you'd win $10,000. And so that was like an ongoing challenge that they had all the time.
That's interesting. So they were obviously artists, right? In the sense of martial arts, but they were also businessmen too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rorion Gracie for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a lawyer as well. And,
oh, really? Okay.
Apparently a very good marketer as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So my dad came across those tapes, ordered them. We watched them and were like, wow, this is awesome, And then he ordered, Gracie instructionals, their basic instructionals with Rorion and Royce Gracie. And I mean, nobody was doing jiu-jitsu because, it was very new to America. The Gracies were in California. And until Royce was in the UFC, so this was around 1992.
Okay.
And then the UFC started in 1993.
Okay.
So we were doing jiu-jitsu before the UFC, and then when we saw Royce was going to be fighting in this event, we were very anxious to see it and watch it, and kind of had an idea what would happen, and then
because till that point you were watching the training tapes.
Yes.
Now, were the training tapes, did they have kind of live like real fighting going on in the training tapes?
No, the ones that we had were just instructionals, but as I said, with the Gracie in action tapes was all live fights from
really?
that Gracie challenge.
Okay.
You know, over
Right. Okay.
like a 70-year period or something like that. So
That's pretty wild.
so that kind of sparked his attention, and then he ordered the instructionals, and that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple times, and I think this is, again, I'm speaking from someone who has very little background, right?
Yeah.
So some of these things are super interesting and not things that I understood before trying to just learn a little bit for the interview. And so you mentioned a few times about self-defense.
Yeah.
And that you wrote about it some. And one of the things you said that I read was that early, you know, with your dad and the self-defense tactics, and you even mentioned you guys were really dialed into this true self-defense.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean, you know, to be true self-defense? And you touched on this a little bit. What's the difference between like jiu-jitsu for self-defense and jiu-jitsu for sport?
Yeah, jiu-jitsu can take on different faces, right? So you have people who are going to come because they want to learn self-defense, right? You're going to have people who want to compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You're going to have people who are just hobbyists. They want to come, get some exercise. They don't want to get beat up, you know, just want to have some fun and learn some cool techniques. And then people might start in Jiu-Jitsu because they eventually want to do mixed martial arts or something like that. So it can be practiced differently. And the cool thing about Jiu-Jitsu, it is for everyone, right?
Yeah.
As we were practicing it back in the day, when we say self-defense, some of the techniques, like in the Gracie Academy, the Gracie combatives, is all about, you know, Jiu-Jitsu and how the main techniques, the highest percentage techniques that they're going to use for self-defense to cover all the major situations. And that's pretty much what we were practicing back then.
Does that mean like in other words, is that like we're going, this is for real life self-defense? Is that kind of the emphasis?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, ultimately, and this is what my father believed, was, you know, if you're trying to learn self-defense,
Right.
then as you're learning the techniques, you know, eventually the type of sparring that you are going to do has to be realistic.
Right.
Right? Otherwise, you're never going to know if you can
Right.
make this stuff work on somebody who's fully resisting you, trying to beat you up at the same time, right? Because it can be playful, right? And so some of the hobbyists that might learn jiu-jitsu might learn to make it more playful. They'll slow the pace down a little bit, don't want injuries, you know, things like that. Whereas in self-defense, you know, the intensity is a lot higher. And back when my dad was teaching, it was always just bare knuckle fighting, basically. So it was always
you could get pretty beat up
group.
in those sessions.
Yeah. Oh, we had people that would get, you know, they loved it. Like they'd
Right.
come there and they would go through it, and they're just like, they felt so good, you know, about it. Like, but they would get so nervous about coming to each class because every class was like that. It was intense. And so we had many people over the years when my dad was teaching just quit coming, you know, because they were just so nervous about showing up.
Really?
Even though after they showed up and went through it, they felt like, you know.
Right. But
you
it's
know,
leading up to
I'm
it.
a man, you know, type of thing. But yeah.
Well, that goes to, I'm sure we'll touch on this some, but the mental preparedness as well as the physical, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a mental aspect to it, and probably even more so if you're in some of those more intense sessions.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, the guy I mentioned early on, the pastor friend of mine, his name is Bob Bonzer, and he taught, he learned and then taught some, but Jeet Kune Do. And so he told me some funny stories, you know, and some neat stuff. And one of them he told me made me think a little bit about, you know, the different dojos and gyms and academies have different goals and purposes, and you need to know that, which is kind of one of the things you were talking about there, right? He told me this story of, so he trained under Danny Asanto, who trained under Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
Or sorry, he trained under Paul Vunak, who trained under Danny Asanto, or Sonato, who then trained under Bruce Lee. So there's like this, this lineage, which is important. So he was in Paul Vunak's class, and they're all, you know, they're in the middle of teaching, and some guy comes in, you know, not part of their group, and he comes in with his staff, and he just kind of stands in the middle of the mat, and he challenges Paul, and he's, basically thinks, Jeet Kune Do isn't going to stand up to, I don't know what style he understood. He's like, he's not going to stand up. And so Paul, I guess, said to him, look, we don't fight the way you do. And this thing, like it was more closer to like true self-defense. Yeah. It's like, we don't fight the way you do. This is not going to go well. Just go home. Yeah. And the guy's like, no, I know I can beat you. Went back and forth a couple of times. Finally, he's like, okay. So he grabs, I don't know the names of the equipment, but these sticks.
Eskrima sticks. And
the guy's standing in the middle of the mat with his staff, and Paul just turns around and just cracks him in the knuckle. And I guess it breaks his hand. He like drops the staff, and he's like, pick up your staff and go home. I told you we don't fight that way. If you come back again, the same thing's going to happen. And I guess, Jeet Kune Do, I guess, is about kind of using whatever you have available to defend yourself. And I guess was the lesson he was trying to teach that guy. I don't know. But I thought that was a pretty crazy story. But you got to know, where you're going and what their philosophy is, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what their approach is. And we'll definitely, I think, touch more on that as we go along as well, because that's super important. So I'm curious, you've mentioned your dad, obviously very important in your development. In your skills. Did you ever get a time, have you ever had a time where you knew you kind of went beyond your dad? Like you guys are into it and you're like, oh, I think I can take him. Like, did that happen? I'm sure at some point.
Well,
right?
I think the introduction of jiu-jitsu into the training definitely helped me with that as I was aging, just because we kind of started jiu-jitsu at the same time. Okay. Right. So, whereas he had been doing the striking skills for a long time before me, whereas we kind of started jiu-jitsu at the same time. And so as I was kind of aging a little bit in jiu-jitsu, I think I was like 13 when I started. But, getting closer to age 16, 17, 18, I'm obviously growing, and probably I'm actually actively sparring with the other students a lot more than he was. So I was able to excel a little bit more just because I was doing a lot more of the live sparring at a certain point. Right. I mean, I can remember, grappling with him and, being able to get on top or something like that and hold him down a little bit, and of course it just makes you feel really good, but of course. I remember one time where we were alone in our academy and we were doing some drills. And drills are like a specific set of rules. So like in jiu-jitsu, you have something called like the guard position when you're on your back, but you're using your legs to control your opponent. So you might do a guard drill where the partner on top of the guard, if it's a self-defense drill, maybe they were trying to beat you up a little bit or pass your legs past the guard and get a better top position, or the bottom guy could be trying to sweep you over, submit you from the back, or strike from the bottom as well. But so let's say that the top guy completes the pass, then okay, let's start the drill over. Or let's say that the guy on the bottom completes a sweep or a submission, then okay, let's start the drill over. I remember one time we were doing the drill, and it was some sort of guard drill like that, and I remember sweeping him and getting on top, and I had him in the mount, and I went to like kind of sit up to get off because I was like, oh, the drill's done. And he just popped me one right in the mouth, And so I kind of like bit my lip, my lip was bleeding a little bit. And then we had two women walk in the door like right after, right? So kind of walking over to these women to introduce ourselves. And I'm like sweaty and bleeding, and, my dad. But that's kind of, with training with him and you always expect the unexpected.
So is that kind of like you got him and he's like, you didn't get me, I just got you. Is that kind of
that's the way it goes, yeah.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Oh man. Well, so about how old were you like that
I would say around that time I was probably 18 or 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was curious, looking back, so that's kind of at the end of your teenage years, right? Yeah. So not now, but as a teenager, how do you think having those skills affected you, just who you were and in the moments that you were in? How would you, like looking back now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really builds your confidence, whereas some other martial arts, I feel maybe give you a false sense of confidence. I've always had confidence because I started martial arts so young, and I did believe in the things that I was doing. But the difference is that most of the striking arts, you can't train at 100% in the same way that you can train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because of the tap out. You can force somebody.
So explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so in Jiu-Jitsu, your main objective is to dominate and control somebody, put them in a position where you can utilize most of your body to attack one of their limbs, right? So you might get an arm bar or a chokehold, something like that. And so when you get them in a submission hold, and they start to feel the pressure and the pain of the submission, they're going to tap out. They're going to tap you a few times, and that basically means stop, right? So in that moment, like, you can go pretty hard. Somebody can be resisting 100%, and they know that if I get them, then they can tap out and they're going to be okay. So it's like they're going to tap out before the arm gets broken or before they go unconscious or something like that, right? Whereas in striking arts, to have that same reality would be you have to knock somebody out. You have to be fighting to knock somebody out because you don't know how much damage or abuse somebody can take before they're going to stop fighting back, right?
Right.
So when you're stand-up sparring and you have all these pads on and everything, it can build a false sense of security because you don't really know that what you're doing is going to work.
Yeah, you're not going to be out in public with pads on.
Right. Yeah.
And you just don't. Yeah, you don't know how, or even if you're hitting somebody, you don't know how your hand's going to hold up or whatever.
Exactly.
Right?
And jiu-jitsu means gentle art, and part of that is that they took out what they would call the dangerous moves. So, eye gouging, biting, hair pulling, these kind of things that are very dangerous. Not to say that an arm lock or a chokehold isn't dangerous, but you can practice them and apply them in such a way that they can be safe.
Right. Whereas
if we were in a grappling match or we were sparring, I can't just gouge your eyes out, right? So it's hard for me to say how effective that's going to be for me in a fight if I've never really done it in the first place.
Right.
But I do know that through the practice of jiu-jitsu as I practice, I could easily get somebody in such a dominant position that doing those type of things would actually be very easy to do, right? So jiu-jitsu builds your confidence in that way, and so that confidence, plays out in everything that you do, And jiu-jitsu is intense, even when you're practicing it calmly, it's still intense. You still have somebody on you trying to submit you. There's different levels of intensity and different kinds of people that you practice with, but it really helps you be calm under pressure. It's kind of a trademark of jiu-jitsu is learning to stay calm. Breathe when you're being smashed into the mat, and just uncomfortable because of somebody's weight even, or because, they're sweating on you, it's dripping in your eyeball, just so many different weird things that can happen, but it teaches you to remain calm, keep your cool, and kind of problem
control,
solve.
kind of internal, regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. And to be able to coach yourself through it, I know what to do here, I'm going to do this, and, take the steps.
We've talked before, that's one of the things that's really appealing to me about jiu-jitsu is that concept of learning to control, your emotions in the midst of whatever's going on around you. And that's one of the things that, I don't know, I might be there someday to take advantage of that because I think that would be definitely a helpful thing for me, for sure. I don't know if I might have shared this with you before, but it reminds me of a story a guy told me that this is probably 99, I think. There was a guy that I worked with that took some jiu-jitsu and took some classes and went to one of the Gracie guys, was doing a class somewhere, right? And it was on a beach. And actually, as I'm telling the story, it's like there's a common thread through some of these. So they were doing training, and one of the guys, so I'm curious about this. I'll ask you in a minute how often this happens, but one of the guys, he knows he can beat the instructor, right? And he's a tough guy. He's like, I want to fight you, and I don't remember which Gracie it was, but, so they started rolling, and within, a few seconds, the instructor said kind of what you're saying. He says, right now you're panting, you're out of breath. My heart rate hasn't even gone up. And he had him in a submissive kind of a hold. And he was just telling him how in control he was as he was doing what he was doing, And of course it blew everybody away, And so, Yeah, I don't know. How have you ever had that? Like, 'cause, I mean, I get that is part of it, right? There's this machismo thing. And so people, I'm sure over the years, has that happened? Somebody comes into the gym and they just want to prove something? And,
Yeah, back when we first, like when I was first training and still had a very, very strong self-defense emphasis, and we still do now. You know, our combatives program is all about self-defense, but the attitude behind it maybe is a little different. But yeah, we used to have a lot of other black belts come train with us. You know, we were like the only people in town that did jiu-jitsu. And of course, as the UFC was getting more popular and people saw that, you know, people wanted to challenge themselves a little bit against jiu-jitsu. So we'd have other strikers come in and want to kind of challenge against jiu-jitsu. They wouldn't come in all, you know, big and bad and do that, but they're just more like, hey,
there was
can we come spar
factor,
sometime? And
so they wanted to test.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, now it's a lot more known, obviously, right? But there was a period of time where people heard about it, but they hadn't seen it and certainly hadn't put their skills up against it.
Absolutely.
So there was a real interest in that.
Yeah, and back to that false sense of security or confidence, in my experience too with that, a lot of times, like, we would spar. So I'm sparring with somebody, you know, I don't know this person very well, but they wanted to spar. And the rule set's pretty open, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're going to go at it a little bit here. Right. We didn't even wear pads. And, you know, I would take them down, you know, clinch with them, do a takedown, take their back and choke them. I would do that same routine pretty much over and over again most of the time. So when people don't know jiu-jitsu, if you get on top and you just smack them a few times, they're almost always going to turn their back, and then you can get back control and choke them. So you would do that, and so let's say the first time you stand up, and they're like, yeah, I think I probably, you know, I held back on my strike on the way and I could have hit you. And I'm like, all right, it's okay. You don't have to hold back. No big deal.
You're like, wait a second, I know there's a reason.
Yeah.
I can fix it. Let's try this again.
Let's do it again.
Wow.
Right? And I would say, don't hold back. It's okay. Right? And the same thing would happen. And it's really hard for them to accept it, you know, because they have been doing something for so long.
Yeah. Plus they're experiencing somebody doing something to them that they probably haven't experienced before, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So they're probably, someone was just processing like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I think I know. Oh, I think I know what I can do against that. But, right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, so curious, you know, you started at 5. You were very skilled into your early teenage years and certainly in your later teenage years. There's a lot that goes on, you know, for a young man in his teenage years. Any guy can probably sit around and tell a few stories of some things. So I'm curious, you know, how did having that skill set affect your social life in either like positive, negative, you know?
Yeah, it's funny because my going into high school, I would hear actually like people would come up to me and tell me a story about my father. That they heard that was totally not true. Right.
They'd like grown and
some
grown.
crazy Superman story, you know what I mean? And I would just kind of laugh, you know what I mean? And some of that same things would happen with me, you know, like I would hear people telling a story about me and I'm like, you know, I just don't really remember that. Like, or at least going down that way, making me, you know, more Superman than I am. And, but, you know, so my friends would kind of sometimes talk big about me. And I would hear other stories from people like, yeah, don't mess with Luke, you know, all this stuff. And, you know, I was
kind of talk smack for you to someone else. That's nice of them.
I was always a nice guy though. You know, I never tried to start any kind of trouble or anything like that. And,
but did I mean, if they're doing that, did other people who were like, oh, let's see how tough he is? Like, did people try
nobody ever, I mean, within my friend circle, I would have people that would kind of just like tackle me. You know what I mean? And just to see what would happen. And then I'd, you know, grab them and submit them, right? And so that would happen from time to time. No big deal. But nobody really tried to test themselves against me realistically. Yeah.
Wow. So well, I'll ask the question, like, would you consider your path as you described, you know, learning jiu-jitsu, right? With your father kind of teaching you and then, you know, the path you took after that. Looking back, and obviously you're teaching a lot of different students now, was your path a typical one or was it atypical? And like, how did that progression, go?
My jiu-jitsu path?
Yes.
Yeah, so my jiu-jitsu path and story is very unique because when we started and how we started, because we started pre-UFC, there was no jiu-jitsu. So my father, once again, ordered instructional VHS tapes.
Yeah.
And, back then there was no YouTube or anything like that either, so.
Hard to believe, hard to imagine.
Oh, yeah, I know, it's crazy. My kids, they can't even imagine that, right? But yeah, it was all VHS instructional tapes. That's where we started learning jiu-jitsu originally for years and years. And then if like Royce Gracie was in, doing a seminar in Atlantic City, we'd go to that. And Hickson Gracie, we'd go to that. And any seminars that we could get into, we would do. But there was just no jiu-jitsu to be found. Eventually, a few guys like in the Marylands, like Rockville and Virginia areas started some jiu-jitsu academies. The year on that, I'm not exactly sure, but I connected with them a little bit and trained a little bit at one of those academies in Rockville, but for a very short time. My father had already, had an academy going, not necessarily a jiu-jitsu academy. It was a self-defense academy, and I was already teaching, a little bit, and it was really hard to get down the road and train with other people. So, and then in the year 2000, my father, completely stopped teaching altogether, and so I was learning jiu-jitsu all by myself on my own. And eventually, YouTube did come out, and that was a useful tool. But the main reason why I started competing was because I did not have a jiu-jitsu instructor, and I just wanted to test myself in jiu-jitsu competition and see how I would do and all that kind of stuff. And
that's a heck of a way to test your skills, though.
Yeah.
All right, go compete, see what happens.
Yeah, and I did very well in competition, and eventually was winning at a black belt level. And winning in professional divisions and making a little money doing that. So, I knew I was on the right track and still learning it very well. And then in I think it was around 2005, one of my students was driving all the way from the Woodbridge area to train with us, about an hour drive. And then he had discovered Leo Dalla, who was in that area. And he's like, hey, man, do you know anything about this guy, Leo Dalla? He's a Brazilian guy teaching jiu-jitsu. I'm like, I don't know, and he was asking kind of permission to train with him. I'm like, yeah, of course, go train with him. He's right by, you're driving an hour to get here, Right. So he started training with Leo Dalla, and then eventually, he wanted me to come and, be introduced to him. So I did that, and I would go to their open mat sessions, which is just when you basically are rolling. It's not like a class. You're just rolling with everybody, grappling with everybody. And, I did well going there and doing that, and felt confident. And so then, and I would do that off and on, not a whole lot. And then in 2011, I approached Leo Dalla and said, hey, you know what? I want to pursue something official. I don't know what the best way to do that is. Yeah. In jiu-jitsu. And so I had known him for 6 years at this point. And again, I wasn't taking classes from him, or I would go there when I could, which wasn't a whole lot. And he said, I said, is there a way that I can pursue getting a belt through you? And he said, really, I haven't taught you anything. I don't really think that would be the right approach. You kind of deserve the credit for what you've done. So what he suggested was that we go through the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, which is kind of like the federation, and they host the biggest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments in the world and things like that. And he just said, I can validate you, and we'll go through them and get you certified through them. And he said, I'll validate you as a second degree black belt because I've known you for 6 years, and I know that you were a black belt when we first met. So he said, black belt level when we first met. So basically, usually when you get your black belt, 3 years later, you can get your first degree, and then 3 years after that, you can get your second degree. So he said he'd validate me for a second-degree black belt. And so my first official belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was a second-degree black belt.
Wow.
So, I didn't, just that's the way my story worked out, and
Yeah. What a great guy to run into.
yeah, absolutely. And he's
like, ego could be a thing there, right? The
Yeah.
guy could be like, well, you haven't trained under me long enough.
Yeah.
Right. But it was the exact opposite, actually.
it can be very political,
Right.
You know what I mean? And Dala is a great guy,
Yeah,
and
sounds like it.
he was very supportive, and he does a lot of good for a lot of people. There was certainly talk of people saying that, I was paying Dala all this money and nothing. I didn't pay him anything,
Yeah.
and he just is a good guy, and he was being honest. So
That's pretty cool. So, yeah, I'm trying to think back what you said about you eventually started competing. Was the main motivation there for, it sounds like it was, for like when you first started competing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was it basically, all right, I got to kind of test my skills somehow, and that's going to be the best way for me to do it? Was that kind of the initial, or was there other reasons why you competed,
definitely.
or was that the main thing?
I mean, I had a competitive drive,
Right.
But that was definitely one of the main reasons. I just wanted to prove.
Was that always there, just from when you were a little kid even? You were pretty competitive?
I wasn't so competitive, and I'd say I'm a competitive person, but I'm not like super competitive. Like my son Judah, he's a really competitive kid, and I'm not, that kind of competitor.
Yeah.
But I have a competitive nature. But with like the Tang Soo Do and the karate stuff that we always did, I never really competed a whole lot. I did compete and that kind of stuff. I did play other sports,
right.
But once I kind of got into jiu-jitsu and I saw the UFC and all that, like I wanted to test myself in that way.
Right.
And so that kind of got me in the drive for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition.
Okay. So how many years did you compete?
I was competing
roughly
from like 1997 until like 2005 were like my main competitive years.
Yeah.
And not nearly as many competitions going on back then as there are now. Generally we'd have to drive to Richmond, Virginia, or like New Jersey, somewhere like that to compete. Now there's competitions every weekend, just about everywhere.
So like learning it the way you did, which was a very unique path, as you described it, looking back, that had to produce unique results, right? In you. So when you look back, what would you say were the benefits of doing it that way? Because you did it the way you had to do it. And then were there any drawbacks as you look back to that experience in growing?
Yeah, so I'd say there were some major pluses, and that was that I wasn't learning jiu-jitsu necessarily in a box. Especially when the UFC first started, it was this no rules, no weight classes kind of thing. And that was the way that I kind of learned jiu-jitsu and trained in jiu-jitsu. So I was learning jiu-jitsu, but I was also learning like some catch wrestling and some other like sambo, grappling arts, and kind of putting it all together, as our self-defense system. And I learned jiu-jitsu. I never really learned it in the beginning stages separate from the striking. So there was always strikes involved with the grappling, because it was more self-defense oriented. Eventually we kind of did separate that out and offer striking programs and then the grappling programs, and then still programs where they were mixed together. But so there was a progression within that. But I think because I wasn't learning under somebody and doing it a particular way, that I got a lot of exposure, like especially when YouTube was available, I was learning everything, And so I think that was good, and I think that my the way that I learned it, and because I didn't have an instructor, I was I wanted to be the best, you know what I mean, the best that I could possibly be, so that when people came, they would know that I was good and feel that as a grappler and as an instructor. And then the competition was kind of me building my credentials at the time. The downfall, I would say, of all of that was the lineage, like you were mentioning a little bit ago. And that's one of the reasons why I eventually approached Leo Dalla about getting an official certification.
Yeah. Can you just speak to, like, briefly on, because no matter what martial arts I kind of look into and start asking questions and try to learn about, lineage seems to be important, and all of them, like, who was your teacher and who was his teacher, and to go back. Why is that? What's the deal with that?
I honestly think it's silly because generally when you take lineage and you move it back, okay, you're going to move it. Okay, my lineage goes back to Bruce Lee, right? Whereas Bruce Lee, even though he has a lineage, he's known for his ability to be creative and to take things from different styles and be like a self-learner, And then same thing with Helio Gracie, the founder of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. How does your lineage, take you back to Helio Gracie basically at the end of the day? And Helio Gracie or Carlos Gracie, but he's known for his innovation and taking something that he learned from somebody and improving upon it and making it better and being creative and being a self-learner, right? So I think it's kind of silly. I think at the end of the day, everybody should be their own student of the art.
Yeah.
I believe that having an academy, like I own an academy, right? You have a community, you have a team, you have people that you can test with and, kind of learn with and grow with, and it's going to excel your learning. But don't just be a student of the instructor, be a student of the art, be a self-coach, be a self-learner, and continue learning when you're not there.
Do you think maybe could it go back to, so Jeet Kune Do, and certainly as you've described Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there is an encouragement for kind of a little bit at least of self-expression, or maybe a lot, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But not all martial arts are like that, right? So some of them are very form-oriented.
Yeah.
I mean, could it be that it's way more important because the guy that taught you, did he teach you the right form?
Right.
Was he the master of that
purist
form kind of thing?
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe it kind of goes back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're learning something very specific in its purest form, then it's going to matter. But also, one of the reasons why in jiu-jitsu, at least, lineage is so important was that when jiu-jitsu became very popular, after the UFC, and, the Gracies were a very popular name, but there's all these Brazilians in Brazil, right, that started moving to America because they knew that it was blowing up and they could make some money here in America.
Businessmen.
Yes, but maybe in Brazil, they were a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. By the time they get to America, they're a black belt in jiu-jitsu.
Oh, okay.
Right? So, and the average person would not know the difference because a purple belt, to the average person is still very good, Yeah. And so there was a lot of that going on from what I've read and heard. So then, lineage becomes really important because is this person being true and honest about where they're at?
Yeah, and even within the Gracie family, there's a lot of these like splinters, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's pretty interesting. So, having that background, it's really interesting as you describe it. I was kind of thinking about this before the interview, but as you described it, like, how's he going to answer this? Having that background, it sounds like it almost could have given you more confidence going into some of these early competitions. Mm-hmm. But when I was reading about your background, I thought, I wonder if that affected your confidence, like in a negative way, going, I'm not sure if I have this lineage that this guy has and I'm going to compete against. Or maybe based on how you're describing it, it's almost like I don't need the lineage, and being able to fight in all these different ways, I actually have a leg up on this guy because he's got kind of one single path that he's been kind of focused on. So I don't know, how did you approach that?
Yeah, so like in my first jiu-jitsu competition in 1997, it was the Half Gracie Open, and I had never competed in jiu-jitsu, and honestly, I didn't even know the rules of jiu-jitsu because that's not how I trained.
Yeah.
We were pretty open in our self-defense program, right? And we incorporated a lot more than just Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So I wasn't even sure what to expect. Were we going to be like ripping each other's arms off, or what's going on?
So you literally went into this competition like not knowing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was like a point system that I wasn't even really aware of. you know.
Okay.
I just knew that our goal was to take one another down, to control each other, and try to submit each other. I knew that there weren't going to be striking in this tournament.
Right. But that's still, that takes some confidence.
Yeah, and like Half,
Wow.
it was the Half Gracie Open, and Half Gracie was one of the refs there actually, and he was just known for his intensity, like in fighting, and just being this brutal, you know, like destroyer, you know.
Right.
And so yeah, I really had no idea what this was going to be like, and so I was nervous, but I was also confident in my abilities, all the same, and I wanted to test myself, you know. So, yeah, you know, it was a completely different thing, which is what I learned that day.
Right.
And
so how did it go that day?
It went good. I mean, I had 3 matches. I won my first 2 and then lost my 3rd match. And I lost to someone named Frank Cucci, who was I actually had in a magazine at my house. He was on the cover of this Full Contact magazine, is what it was called, all geared up in he was an ex-Navy SEAL. And so I saw him, and actually, I know that guy. He's the dude on the cover of my magazine. You know? So I was a little intimidated at that point.
A little starstruck.
But I put up a really good fight, and it was a great match. Yeah.
That's cool. So, would you say that guy, or who would you say would be the kind of the most prominent guy that you fought against? I read that you fought against Pablo Popovitch.
Yeah,
would he be up there? Who would be the kind of that top guy you think you competed against?
I think he was definitely the most talented jiu-jitsu guy that I fought against. He's definitely one of the best in the world. He went on to win, you know, Abu Dhabi and beat Marcelo Garcia, who was multiple time champion. He was one of the best. So, and Pablo had already had, you know, many super fights and much more competition experience than I did.
Right.
And my match against him was my first, like they called them, super fight. So in a tournament where you maybe have 1,000 competitors or something, the super fights were the ones that the whole mat was cleared for, and it was like just you two out on the mat.
Everybody watching.
And everybody was watching. Yeah. So it was kind of like a little highlight of the tournament. So So I was flown to Florida to compete against him, and you know, honestly, I really didn't even know who he was.
What does that mean? You were flown to Florida? Does that mean they like?
Oh, the promoter of the event, paid to fly me out, and
Cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. Well, I looked him up, and you probably know this, but it was interesting just to see, like, I mean, he was obviously very legit, but he was inducted into the Grappling Hall of Fame in 2010. So he was, you know, really good.
Yeah, so. And he didn't submit me. It was a 10-minute match. He ended up winning by points. So I felt good about it.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. So you touched on a little bit about getting nervous. Would you always get nervous before, or like eventually you get to the point where it's kind of just this calm before fights, or what was your typical demeanor before a fight?
Definitely in the beginning was nervous, but competing a little bit more, you learn to kind of deal and control those nerves a little bit. I mean, you always have them, but it's to what extent, and it's just kind of how do you handle those nerves. And I kind of found just, you know, do some different breathing exercises, get warmed up really well, you know, and kind of usually would take care of it.
Okay. So when you were competing, and this might have changed obviously over the years of competing, but what did your training, like a typical training week, what did it look like for you?
Leading into a competition, or?
Yeah, I guess so.
It's different if you're competing, you know, because your intensity level should be higher, and you should be focusing on what you would call your A game. It's not like when you're preparing for an event within a certain amount of time, you're not trying to like learn and experiment with new things as much as you are just really trying to sharpen your sword and make sure that you can implement your game to its fullest. And so you know, when you're rolling with people, you might be doing the same exact things over and over and over again because this is what you plan to do,
right?
You know, when you
like
step out on the mat.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, and then the week of, you usually focus more on just keeping your fitness high, but you don't want to get any injuries or you want to be too sore or anything like that. So you wouldn't go very hard, but you would still focus on the fitness of everything and just the mental, the visualization of. You know, what's going to happen. And for me, I would always be like, well, if I go and I win, I would always go to church on Sundays and everything. So it's like, I know I'm just going to get up and go to church on Sunday. It's just going to be a normal day anyway.
Right.
Nobody at church is really going to care.
Right.
And I knew the same thing.
You're not going to be busting the church doors with your entourage.
Yeah, exactly. Where are my medals? And then I knew if I lost, I was still going to be doing the same thing on Sunday, right? So it was just kind of like
some stability there.
Yeah, like I'm the same person the day after that I was the day before, whether I win or lose.
Right.
And I knew that all my students and family, would feel the same way too. So just kind of learning not to stake your identity on that.
Yeah.
Really kind of helped out with the nerves because I think people really can. It becomes their identity.
Right.
If you're really competitive, a lot of pro athletes in any field, it's kind of like when those competition days are over, when they're past their prime and their identity was kind of staked on that, there's usually a depression to follow, you know what I mean? Because they're not living in that place anymore.
So it sounds like from what, like one of the prominent things you mentioned, I would kind of term as community. You had community around you that grounded you.
Yeah.
Right? Because they knew you before, they knew you after, like you said, a great success or a failure, or not doing so well. It's the same people, and like you said, they don't change the next day.
Absolutely.
So that's actually pretty helpful, probably. Or if you flip it around, if somebody doesn't have that community and they experience success, it might be really hard to stay grounded because you don't. Who do you have, to help you with that?
Absolutely.
It could be a big challenge, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh. That's interesting. So during that time, as you were describing that training, you didn't mention anything. So I'm curious, like running, doing weightlifting, any of that kind. Did you do any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that was all part of it.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
We would,
did you have like certain mileage you would run, or like?
I never was much for long distance running. I would do sprints and things like that.
Right. Okay.
I remember way back when I was competing, we would often take a jog to another area downtown. It is actually where Carroll Creek is now, but it was not done up yet.
Right.
And there was like this spot out there where we would run to, and then we would do a stretch, and then there was like this hill, and we used to do we would call them like these hill runs. And so we would like actually run up the hill backwards and then do an exercise like jump squats at the top of the hill, then shuffle down the hill quickly and do another exercise at the bottom. We had a certain amount of sets that we would do, and it just like totally exhausted your legs. But I remember doing that back then and getting outside and doing some of that extra training, which was a lot of fun. Was
there a method to it, or did you just kind of, I need to make sure I sprinkle some of this in here or there? Because I mean, obviously the actual like rolling on a mat, I'm sure was very methodical, right? You're trying to learn moves over and over again. But what about the other stuff? How did that work into your schedule?
Yeah, so I always felt that like, to be in shape for jiu-jitsu, really one of the best things to do is jiu-jitsu. You just got to do it the right way. Like when I roll now, as I'm older and just even more technical, like I generally try to keep it pretty slow. Like I can control people and keep the match pretty slow. So I don't get the same workout as a beginner might get because they're using all of their energy.
Right.
I'm not using that much energy, know, and they're using a ton of energy. So they're getting a great workout doing jiu-jitsu, right? So, but when I was training for competitions, we always made sure that there was a lot of movement. It was more intense and specific drills that made you use a lot more energy. Or we would do the shark tank where you'd have new people coming in against you all the time. So you're getting more and more tired and you got fresh people coming in. So that was really the primary thing. And a lot of the other things were more to supplement the ability to do that.
Right.
So even like the strength training and stuff was just making sure that your body was conditioned to handle the intensity of the jiu-jitsu, and then the sprints were, obviously just keeping the heart rate up, just have that brief shot of intensity, and things like that. But, really the main focus for me was always the jiu-jitsu
itself. Doing it.
Yeah.
On the mat and doing it. So during that time, was it your dad that was like, would he be considered your trainer, or how did you?
Really, no. I did most of my, I think I competed in 97 and maybe another time before like that year 2000. And from like 2000 to 2005, I was already kind of doing everything on my own.
Okay.
And so it was mainly me leading myself with the team of people that I had.
Right.
And they were competing as well. So we were just training together.
Okay. Cool. It takes a lot of insight to be able to kind of do that, I would think, without somebody from the outside kind of training, to be able to know all the small little things you got to do to adjust your body and to move in different ways and to learn all those moves.
Yeah, and we were learning as we went with that, because it's like you do a competition, but like, we need to focus more on this. You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So was there a form of scouting that you were able to do or not? I mean,
To get people?
well, so like if you're going to compete against
Okay,
somebody, I mean, there probably wasn't, was there?
No, I mean, there was
You
really...
just hear
around
like
here,
word
there
of mouth,
was-
like, hey, is this guy any good? And you yes or
Yeah.
no, and that was it, right?
Yeah, there wasn't nearly as much availability to do that now because of the internet wasn't quite what it is now,
Right.
and there wasn't much footage of people or anything like that,
Yeah.
so...
Again, to me, that would take some really mental fortitude. Like you're going against somebody you literally really don't know anything
Yeah,
about
and
them.
I honestly would rather not know. Yeah, honestly, I
Oh,
think
really?
sometimes the scouting can give you a false picture sometimes too.
Oh, interesting.
So
Yeah.
because it can look different, me grappling with one person and me grappling with another person, it
Yeah.
can look different, you know what I mean? And you could see patterns over time. You can say, oh, this person obviously has a really good double leg takedown, or they have a really good arm bar.
Right.
So I'm going to train to deal with those things a little bit.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, it's just you want to be able to implement your will and your game against them.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, you're losing. So
Yeah.
you just really need to make sure that you can implement your game.
Right. That makes sense. So you mentioned kind of traveling that you did to compete. And so locally, obviously, the jiu-jitsu community is very small. But once you started traveling, was it still small? So in other words, when you would go to these competitions, did everybody kind of know everybody and they go, oh, there's that Luke guy again? Or was it, you go to each one and just see faces you'd never seen before, they didn't know who you are? Like, what was it big or was it a small community?
It was a really fast-growing sport.
Okay.
But at the same time, you would definitely see a lot of the same people that you had seen, so you'd,
Right.
sometimes compete against the same people again, you know. But then there was always new faces coming along as well. So, yep.
Huh. So eventually, it sounds like your focus, it sounds like you were always competing and teaching. Is that true? Or like how did that?
During that time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of stopped competing, like I said, primarily in like 2005. So my super fight with Pablo Popovitch was, that was June of 2005, I believe, May or June of 2005. And I was getting married in June of 2005. So when I got married,
some things changed.
Yeah. And so our plan when we got married, my wife Katie, we talked about this stuff before marriage. Yeah, we'll get married, and then maybe like 3 years later, we'll think about having children, that sort of thing. And so we get married, and then 3 months later, she gets pregnant. And so that kind of like blew my mind, really. I wasn't ready or expecting that. And I think I made her take the test twice. Take it again,
Yeah. You got to be sure about this.
But I wasn't making hardly any money with the academy back then.
Yeah.
I was doing landscaping with my father. So when he stopped in 2000, he started a landscaping company, and I started doing landscaping with him as well. And so I kind of had to refocus a little bit, and I was like, I need to make something of this business.
Right. Okay.
Primarily, it was me just having fun up to then. You know what I mean? Doing my training, and whoever wanted to be involved.
Competing, a little extra money if I win, that's great. But
and it was very intense. So if people came in, they couldn't handle it, that was fine. You know what I mean? Like they just didn't belong there at the time. You know what I mean? Whereas when you're trying to run a business, you want it to grow, and you want to make it suitable for everybody, and still be able to offer that competitive side for those who want to do it. But having beginner programs and just a more set curriculum and just way of doing things that are going to bring in new people and have them feel comfortable coming in. So
that transition, there was a transition, it sounds like, eventually over to more teaching than competing. And some of that was probably kind of driven by stability, I guess, right?
Yeah. And just my desires started to shift, and we still had a lot of competitors, and then people started competing in mixed martial arts and all that. And I was coaching them and sparring hard and fighting with them all the time. But my own desire to compete was kind of vanishing a little bit slowly. Right. And it really does take, like, you have to be selfish in a sense of you need to focus on yourself a lot and spend a lot of time doing that. And for me personally, that was just, I couldn't do that and then focus on running the business and then focus on my new family, growing my family. It was just too much. So,
was that a difficult decision to come to, or was it kind of like obvious to you?
It wasn't super difficult, but there was definitely times where it was just like, man, like, especially when I saw like where Pablo went with everything. I know that I was just kind of reaching, not even my prime yet. And I know I could have gone far if I wanted to. Right. But
it's a different lifestyle.
Yeah. That's not my lifestyle. It's not a lifestyle that I want.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Good to be able to know that about yourself without having to find out the hard way,
Yeah. I get a lot of joy out of teaching other people and really even just helping them grow as human beings and build their confidence and things like that.
Well, good, because that leads to what I wanted to ask you about next, which is, the clinch and, the one of the things that I read that you said was really important was that it's, the clinch is not just a gym, and you've even mentioned it here a couple of times. It's an academy. And so when you say that, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's a place of learning. It's a school, and it's a place to come better yourself, So as I was saying, I really like, I want to help people build confidence in themselves, and feel comfortable that they could defend themselves if that, were something that needed to happen, have confidence in that way. But there's so much more to confidence than just being confident for self-defense. It's going to help you do everything else that you do in life even better because, as I said, you're coming into this, and eventually, if you keep training, you're going to find yourself in some intense situations. And you're going to learn to persevere and overcome these things, learn to problem solve. It's going to build humility, I always say that the mat doesn't lie. Yeah. Right? So somebody might come in and speak a certain way, but then when it comes down to it and they're on the mat, the mat's not going to lie. Right? So
it's like those guys coming back, turning over and over again, going, "No, I think I can do this." And it's like, well, let's see. Yeah. Nope. Try again.
Yeah. So there's like this, you kind of also have to be willing to let it teach you something like humility because some people will continue to make excuses. And then they'll start to avoid rolling with certain people that they might get beat by. And their pride won't let them really take it to the next level to where their growth is really going to just excel if you allow yourself to roll with these people that can defeat you, right? And see it as a learning experience and not a, it's not your identity winning and losing, But, I really like to create an environment where people feel comfortable to come in. They don't feel the macho ego thing going on there. They feel the positive community. They feel that everybody wants to help them learn and get better. And, my favorite thing is to just help people grow in character as they're growing in, technique.
So what are the typical reasons that people come to the clinch? So, and it might even be maybe age ranges have typical reasons, right? Yeah. But I don't know. Are there like kind of these columns are like, well, a lot of people come for this reason or this reason. So I'm curious about that. Yeah. So, and then after that, what would be interesting is like, why do they stay? Is it the same reasons or is it a different reason?
Yeah. I mean, generally people will come for either self-defense or maybe it's somebody who did wrestling and they still want to continue competing in something, so they see jiu-jitsu or mixed martial arts as
but is it like an abstract notion of self-defense, or is it like something happened and I don't want that to happen again. So I'm here.
I think it's that does happen.
Okay.
But I think all in all, it's just a general feeling of insecurity.
Okay.
You know, like right now, these last few years, we've gotten so many people that just feel insecure because of what's going on in the culture and in the environment around us. You know, like now I just feel like I need to learn how to defend myself and my family. You know, and that's been a driving force for a lot of people within the last 2 years or so. But you know, some people just are really competitive people, and the reason why they're coming is because, hey, you know, I want to compete in MMA, you know, or I want to compete in jiu-jitsu. And then other people just want a lifestyle that is, you know, doing something fun that they're going to learn from, be a part of a positive community, but they're also going to get in good shape, you know, and people will come in for that reason as well.
Yeah.
You know,
What about, is that the way they end up staying? Usually the reason they come in, or is it usually like whatever, a year, maybe 2 years later, they'll come up to you and say, you know, I came here for this, but here's why I'm actually still here.
Yeah, I would say the most feedback that we get from students, testimonials and things like that has always been our community, you know, just a positive community. And the instructors are very proficient in what they're doing and patient and want to help people learn and get better. And they can feel that. They can feel the warmth of the academy. You know, we make it a big deal to just be warmly greeting people when they come in the door and help ease the nerves of those people coming in for the first time who might be thinking, what's going to happen? Am I going to get in a fight today? Or you know what I mean? And it's not like that. You know, we have beginner programs. You're going to come in. It's a slow start, basically. And we want people to feel comfortable to come in and do that and feel welcomed there. And like we want them to be there because we do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can definitely testify from experience. You know, I've been there, got invited by a buddy who I think is now instructing, Mike.
Yep.
And he texted me one night. He's like, I ratted you out to Luke. You're coming with me. I'm like, okay, you know, and it was great. Yeah. I mean, I rolled with Mike a little bit, but I rolled with another guy, and I can't remember his name now, but he was great. I mean, he was super helpful. Yeah. He understood, you know, I didn't know anything. So he's, you know, really gentle, but also like trying to teach me a few things. But also just from talking, it's amazing actually how many people I'm bumping into that they don't know that I know you or that I know anything about Clinch, and they'll start telling me about it and trying to recruit me to come.
That's funny.
And like literally people who have nothing to do with one another. So people at work, a guy that I used to go to church with, you know, Mike, who's, you know, now there a lot, but just different people saying, hey, I don't know if you heard of this place, but you should come. So I've seen it, and I've seen like a guy that I used to work with was kind of new in town. He's from Boston, and he used to box, and he was like, hey, you know anything I could do around here? I said, well, yeah, I'll check this place out. And so he was going for a little while, and I just asked him, I said, hey, you know, how's it going? He said, I love it. And he mentioned, you know, the family atmosphere. And he didn't have kids. He just thought, you know, he felt like part of a family there. So definitely seen that over and over again. You know, you guys got some magic going on there that's working really well, which leads to the next question, I think. So every martial arts tradition, and even like each gym or dojo or academy, you know, they each have kind of a distinct philosophy, right? And I've heard it referred to sometimes as like the warrior code. Do you have that? Like, what is the philosophy? You've touched on it a little bit, but I don't know any more you want to talk about that's kind of that warrior code or the philosophy of Clinch Academy?
Yeah, I mean, I've again, character development in my mind is a big part of what we do. You know, in our classes, we often have, in the youth class, every class we have mat chats, and we're talking about honor, respect, patience, perseverance, work ethic, rest, you know, all kinds of different stuff, right? So really teaching the children up in these things. But you'll see a little banner, you know, on our hanging in the academy that basically says, I am here and therefore I am a warrior. And it talks about, you know, not wanting to ever have to be in a fight or defend myself. But if I ever do have to fight, it's going to be for the good. You know what I mean? Like helping somebody else versus picking and starting fights or, being rude and towards people. But,
Yeah.
The samurai had a bushido, and that was just kind of, which is the way of the warrior code, and basically that was to help people see them not as like these monstrous killers, but people who lived in a manner that was good for society and good for the community. Not that all samurai followed that bushido. And for me, I've kind of always saw, the fruit of the spirit from the scriptures as like my bushido, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like what's listed on our banner as kind of like the warrior bushido.
Yeah.
So I stand by that. If you're treating other people the way that you want to be treated, for the most part, I think that's probably the best way of self-defense.
It sounds like a lot of what you're saying maybe people wouldn't normally expect if they're going to a martial arts academy, because it's really, you're talking about the whole person.
Yeah.
Not just a skill set as far as physical skill set, but really the whole person, which is not a small undertaking to care for people in that way. So that's pretty awesome. So obviously you teach, and I'd say, based on your business, you're pretty darn good at it. So can anyone who's good at jiu-jitsu teach, or is there something like above and beyond that you got to be able to have to be able to teach?
Definitely not. So there can be really high level competitors who just aren't good instructors.
Yeah.
And there can be really good instructors who aren't very good competitors, right?
Okay.
So there might even be instructors that are really good that aren't even the best person in the academy. You know what I mean? That might get smashed on the mat a little bit. Teaching within itself, just requires your ability to take what break it down into steps, and explain it in a way that other people can relate to and understand. And then you obviously have people who learn in different ways. And when you're teaching jiu-jitsu, you're teaching verbally, but also physically, so you have like the audible and visual thing going on. And then you have some people who just, they're not really going to get it. They're going to get it more live while they're actually partnering off and practicing. And they kind of have to figure it out on their own a little bit more, and then you can walk around and kind of give tips and kind of coach them through that process a little bit.
Right.
Not everybody really has the ability to do that, or the desire to do that, or the patience to do that.
And even that teaching and doing the things you just said, I assume could change, and probably will change, right? Depending on the age group or even the personality of that person, right?
Absolutely.
So you got to be able to adapt, really, to be a good teacher.
Yeah.
So
you got to have good communication skills, and you have to be able to like kind of read your group, and like you said, adapt.
Yeah.
And in jiu-jitsu, if you're doing a private lesson one-on-one versus a group class,
right.
Private lessons you can really tailor, to somebody, and you can learn the ways that they learn best, and really tailor your teaching style to meet that need. Sometimes in a group, you can't do that for everybody at the same time.
Sure.
But there are different levels of the instruction or points in the class where you can kind of somewhat meet those needs.
Yeah. So what would be the biggest difference between teaching someone who might be, I don't know, maybe I would say like a practitioner versus a competitor, right? Somebody who's coming in, they're not coming in to compete, teaching that person versus you're teaching or maybe training somebody who does want to compete. Like for you, approaching that, what's the biggest difference?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're teaching somebody who wants to compete, they want to be the best that they can be, then you have to set the bar really high, and you have to push them to work harder and to deal with things that somebody who's coming in more as a hobbyist and just a practitioner might not ever want to deal with. You know, they want to be able to go to work the next day and not be hurting, and they don't want to feel sick after a workout. But if somebody wants to compete, They have to experience all of that, before they're out on the competition mat. So you're going to push them a little harder, and you're going to have higher expectations, even in the belt. So like in the ranking system. So there's a variety of black belts in jiu-jitsu where you have the practitioner, you have the artists, you have the competitor.
Oh, interesting.
So a highly competitive black belt, they're going to be super tough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And when you're rolling with them on the mat at the academy, it's going to be tough. Right. Whereas somebody who's more of a practitioner, they may not have experienced jiu-jitsu in the same way as the competitor. Right. But they still are there consistently. They're learning and they're rolling and they're doing their thing, and they still deserve to progress through the ranks.
Yeah.
But when you think of a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it kind of takes us all the way back to Royce Gracie.
Yeah.
You think you should be able to beat Dan Severn, so and size doesn't matter and all these things. And it's certainly not like that for every Jiu-Jitsu black belt.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. So how was your training, maybe teaching as well, but I guess I'm thinking primarily of just practicing the art. So you're getting older, how has it changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, one of my main objectives when I step out on the mat and roll is just not to be hurting the next day. So
okay, that sounds familiar, and I run. That's my main objective.
Yeah.
So okay,
I gotta get out there, and I gotta take a good 10 minutes to stretch and warm up, and get loosened up beforehand. Right. And as I'm doing it, I'm trying to avoid certain things, like what they would call maybe like a scramble in jiu-jitsu, which is when you're it's not as controlled for a brief moment. There's quick explosive movements where anything can happen,
Right.
So I try to avoid those the best that I can. I try to just really control people and slow it down the best that I can. I kind of like try to get to a point where they're reading my energy, you know what I mean?
Right.
And they know I'm not going to explode really hard on them. So hopefully they don't do it in
They
return.
reciprocate.
But I want to be able to do it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I want to be healthy with it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get hurt,
So part of success is getting up from the dinner table and going, oh, okay, it's nothing too bad.
Yeah.
It's hurting too bad here.
Yep.
All right. So you even mentioned this a little bit, trying to make sure that the person that you're training with kind of feels your energy, and probably vice versa, right? Which speaks to that role of like a partner in training, and the camaraderie that can come in jiu-jitsu with training partners. And as I looked into this more, it's super interesting. I hadn't thought about this. It became obvious as I read about it some, but this bond that can form between you and a training partner is pretty interesting. I read a quote from Roger Gracie, who's 14-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion. So he knows what he's talking about. He's probably done just a little bit of training with some partners over the years. And he said, he was talking about training partners, and he said, opponent isn't quite the right word. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you need a willing partner, not just a human punching bag. You can't be unfriendly with someone you're having to learn with, says Gracie. That's why the community is so friendly. Some of the best friends I have in my life came from jiu-jitsu. We try to beat each other up, but in a nice way. Yeah. So can you speak to some of that?
Yeah, well, it's very intimate. There's a lot of hugging that goes on in jiu-jitsu.
Right.
The clinch. It's all about grabbing hold of somebody almost like you're in a hug.
Right, and you're pretty sweaty as you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, you're breathing and sweating on one another.
Yeah.
You can feel each other's heartbeats. You know what I mean? So it's very intimate in that way. And they say a person should get so many hugs in a day anyway.
Right.
So I think jiu-jitsu is really good for that.
You're gonna get your fill.
So it can be very like brotherly in that sense too, But when if any time in life, if you go through a hard time with somebody, it generally makes the relationship stronger. Right. So in jiu-jitsu, you go through that frequently. You go through these hard sessions, these hard rolls, and it just kind of draws you close, So, but there's also a lot of trust, because you have to be able to trust that your partner is not going to break your arm. They're not going to go so intense and so fast that they're not going to give you the time to tap out, right? So you have to believe that they're self-controlled enough, and you trust them that their intentions are never to actually hurt or harm you. And
Mike told me about a guy that he would train with, because he was trying to let me know, hey, you'll be okay. I'll watch out for you when you come and roll. And he said, for example, this one guy he trains with, he's got a wrist issue, but anybody rolls with you, like, look, I use these every day. So go easy on the wrist, right? And so he'll roll with people he knows are going to respect that and know how to train around that without actually hurting them. I thought, it takes a lot of trust, right? That takes a relationship to know, okay, this guy's going to respect that and we're going to be able to work, but be careful at the same time.
And you kind of learn who are good partners for you in that sense. You want to find like-minded people with the same kind of goals. Like if you're coming in and you just want to be that practitioner, have some fun, get a good workout, learn something cool, you might not want to roll with a highly competitive person.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you learn that. And then, of course, we get new people all the time.
Yeah.
So rolling with a new person who doesn't have as much control yet, and they're relying on a lot of strength and things like that, might not always feel very safe, even though we are trying to always coach them and teach them to keep calm, and to be safe about it. And, but when you're getting new people all the time, that's not always very easy. One of the things that I try to implement in the academy is, just don't use foul language. That's like one of our rules.
Right.
And, once again, we get new people all the time. So sometimes people will be using foul language, but, I talk to people and I say, one of the reasons why we don't want you using foul language is because it just shows right away that you have self-control.
Yeah.
Right. If you can control your tongue, and when you're in here, if you can just not use that kind of language. I mean, number one, that's the kind of environment that we want. We want it to be a family-friendly environment at all times, but it's also just a way of demonstrating that you have self-control.
Right.
It's a way to practice self-control. So I know that if somebody is coming in and they're controlling their tongue, that they're more likely to have self-control when we're rolling all the same. But if they cannot control their tongue, and they're not willing to practice self-control in that way, I don't know if we roll, if you're going to,
Yeah, I would think especially that last part you said, practicing the self-control, even if they don't do it perfectly, if they're trying, that shows humility, right? And then that is probably going to play well with, okay, they'll get the culture eventually.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of what you're talking about, I would describe as culture. What's the culture of the organization? And so that even that one first thing about swearing, right, is going to help somebody immediately go, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
And then if you see that positive response, let you know,
all
right, we're going to figure this stuff out.
Yeah. And it just kind of helps too. It's, it helps people know that when they come in here, they're coming to an academy, a place of learning, and it's different. Hopefully it's different than what they're experiencing out everywhere else, and it kind of puts on a mindset, that when you come here, it's different,
right?
And that goes into, no swearing, to, leave your ego at the door, to when you're like in jiu-jitsu class and you're putting, you put your gi on and you're tying your belt, we'll often talk about how that's just a symbol of preparing yourself for the class. Like when you tie your belt on, the attention that you give to that, are you tying it sloppy, crooked and all twisted up? You're probably going to practice the same way, right? But if you're tying it neatly and doing it right, just taking that moment to demonstrate that you're doing this right.
It's like Mr. Rogers coming in, taking off his dress shoes, putting his slippers on, putting his sweater on. He's like, I'm getting ready.
Yeah, it's a mindset.
Right.
You're putting on a mindset.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little different than Mr. Rogers. That's what I was thinking of, though, when you were talking about that.
I don't mind that at all.
No, that's
somebody
cool.
Actually, I haven't seen that new Mr. Rogers movie, but somebody saw it, who trains jiu-jitsu, and said, you need to watch that. For some reason, that movie really reminded me of you.
Oh, is that right?
I still haven't watched it, but I guess I should.
Must have caught me on the wrong night. Both my wife and I watch it, and we're both like getting a tissue.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It was really good. I liked it a lot. It was good, but it got me. It got me good. So. It was pretty good. You mentioned gis.
Yeah.
So, and I know from looking at the training that you all do and the different nights you have, and sometimes you'll have gi and no gi. what's, obviously one is with the gi, one is without, but is there, like, if I would step into a no gi or I'd step into a gi training session, is there a distinct difference of what's going on there? I mean, technically there's going to be a difference, but what is the difference between those two?
Yeah. So the gi is the uniform, and so a gi class, you're wearing the traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu uniform, the belt and all that. And then a no-gi class, you're usually wearing like shorts and a t-shirt or a rash guard, more like that.
What's a rash guard? A lot of people aren't going to know what that is.
A rash guard, it's kind of like just a tight-fitting shirt, so it's not getting caught up in everything. And it just also protects us, from any kind of rashes that you could get from exposing your skin. Yep. When you're rubbing skin with somebody, basically, or against the mat. But technically, there's not a huge difference. Okay. It's mainly the gripping. Yeah. The gripping systems that you use are going to be different. And then there's going to be certain techniques that are higher percentage with the gi on and higher percentage no gi, right? Because of the gripping systems. Right. And then you might have certain things that you don't even really use a whole lot in no-gi. Like with the gi, we have a position called spider guard, where you're gripping somebody's sleeves, you're putting your feet in their biceps, and you're stretching them out, and you're using all of your limbs. And even though you can do that in no-gi, it's not going to be quite as effective because they don't have sleeves, and you have to grab the wrists, and it's not quite the same. Yeah. So, and then certain chokes are going to be a lot easier without the gi than they are with the gi. Oh, so really? Your basic rear naked choke from behind, for instance, when somebody has lapels on and it's kind of thick and they can kind of hide under those lapels a little bit, sometimes it can be difficult to get that choke. Right. But it's a lot easier to get them in a lapel choke where you can grab the lapel and choke them. Yeah. But in no-gi, the arm might slip in there a lot easier. Yeah. So
I think I remember hearing, like, again, going back to the guy that I remember the most, which would be Hoist, like, because he was wearing a gi and a lot of these guys weren't. They were competing. It was this, like, weird advantage to him because guys would grab him by that, which somehow helped him, right? Like, how can you explain that? Like, how does that help?
He wanted to turn it into a grappling match. So if they were grabbing, they weren't punching, right?
Okay. And that makes sense.
Right? And that put him right in the territory that he wanted to be in.
Pretty smart.
And then it also absorbed some of the sweat, so it wasn't so slippery.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, that's pretty neat. So, look, question about UFC. You mentioned, back early on when Hoist started, I think, like, at first there were, like, no time limits. Yeah. Right. So it's very different. I guess were there no rounds, or were there rounds?
Yeah, there weren't rounds. There's no time limit. They would say promoted as no rules. There was basically 3 rules in the beginning, which was no eye gouging, no biting. Yeah. And no fish hooking, which is when you stick your finger in somebody's mouth and kind of like pull or scrape. But I mean, you could kick in the groin, you could pull hair.
Oh, really?
And do all that stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was very different back then. Yeah. Right. And now, they've changed the rules for probably a bunch of different reasons. But, since you've been interested and followed it for this long, you've seen the progression of those changes. So if you could change, like, any one thing about UFC, whether it's going back in time or even, like, maybe moving it forward a little bit, is there something you would change about it?
I would say my favorite era of that was the UFC was the original show, and then eventually there was Pride Fighting Championships, which started in Japan. And so in the beginning, it was like style versus style, everybody had a particular style that they practiced. That's what they knew. And then it started to kind of grow into more of what they called no holds barred. And then people were starting to kind of mix the styles a little bit. And then eventually mixed martial arts, which now has more rules and, a little bit more about the athletes themselves. But in Japan, the Pride Fighting Championships.
Was that Rickson Gracie that did a lot of that?
He did compete in that, yeah.
Okay.
And when they first started, I think they had it so that it was like a 10-minute round and then a 5-minute round. Okay. Which was better for the jiu-jitsu guys, because 5 minutes is not a very long time to submit somebody who is also a good grappler, right? So you kind of have to be able to wear them down a little bit and, set things up and catch them off guard. So, but nowadays, people want to see the knockout more than anything. So it's more about getting people back up to their feet and, so the style changes a little bit. Yeah. And jiu-jitsu is a little different.
So you would want to go back to that like 10-minute, 5-minute maybe, or?
I think even though people have evolved and gotten better at jiu-jitsu, I think having at least one 10-minute round would allow for a little bit more grappling. But what they do is they stand people up if there's not enough action. Yeah. Right. So. Which is pleasing to the crowd.
Yeah, but with Gracie, that was one of the problems, right? Yeah. Was people were complaining. I mean, he was doing what he was doing. Like for him, it wasn't a lack of action. Yeah. Like he was thinking about his moves and waiting for an opening. But I guess from the audience's perspective, it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Right? And you see, they would never do it in reverse, right? So there's plenty of fights where there's not enough action on the feet. Yeah. And they would never say, okay, well, let's start it on the ground. Right. Yeah. So, but they'll do that with the ground and bring it up to the feet,
Yeah, you can see guys dance around forever.
Yeah. And it's hard to get to clinch and get somebody down to the ground who's an experienced fighter as well, who's experienced in these things. It's not an easy thing to do. Right. So if you've been able to accomplish that and you get them on the ground, and then you have to wear them down a little bit and then they stand you back up, that's a major disadvantage for somebody who may be a better grappler than a striker. Yeah. Or maybe even in that particular fight knows that they're more likely going to win with the grappling than the striking.
So you mentioned the pride fighting, which was strictly in Japan. Is that where that? Yeah. Yeah. So I was curious. So there's a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys going over there, or some at least, in fighting. Yep. And isn't Jiu-Jitsu... didn't it originate in Japan, way, way back? Yeah. And so did any of those guys have that skill set and bring it to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys?
Absolutely. I mean, there's Sakuraba, who was the most famous legendary pride fighter, probably. He was one of Japan's, he was a pro wrestler originally, but Japan-style pro wrestling. Right. And he was known as the Gracie Killer. Really? Because he was beating all the Gracies.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Yeah, but he was a really skilled grappler in his own. So,
see, I didn't know there was a Gracie Killer.
Yeah. Wow. The ultimate match back then would have been Sakuraba versus Rickson Gracie, but it never happened. So.
Okay. Yeah. Didn't one of them? I think it was the Japanese guy. He hurt his neck really bad or something. I don't know. They probably all got certain injuries at certain times. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, that's didn't know that. Pretty interesting. So what impact for you looking at UFC, since again, you've been, into various martial arts, including Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before UFC, what kind of impact, other than popularity, I mean, that's kind of the obvious thing, but has UFC had on martial arts, I guess, more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think originally it was a really good eye-opener because, like you said, it's not what we saw in the movies and what we believed to be self-defense, right? So it was a good eye-opener to the martial arts community that even if they wanted to continue practicing their traditional styles of martial arts, that maybe they should add some jiu-jitsu to it, for that practical self-defense. So that was really good. I would say downfall is now a lot of the values have been taken out of martial arts from different academies. They don't have any values. It's just about fighting, and it's more of a gym and about being the best fighter in the world. Right. And they don't practice the traditional values of martial arts. Right. Honor and respect and just the basics, So a lot of that gets stripped away, and then there's a lot of trash talk and macho stuff, So at Clinch Academy, we try to have the modern day martial arts with the traditional values of, the traditional martial arts.
And yet, even with that and sticking to that, you're still seeing success, both in your business, but even in, you have people coming from your academy and going into UFC, right?
Yeah. So Matt Summelsberger fights in the UFC, and he he has been a student of ours for a long time. And he primarily now trains at Crazy 88, a school in Elk Ridge. They have kind of like in an academy, especially in our academy, because we weren't competition isn't our sole focus. Yeah. Even though through the years we've had many great competitors, both in jiu-jitsu and in mixed martial arts, and we have a really good track record with that. It's not our main focus. So there's been different waves where it's, okay, we don't really have that many competitors or fighters in the academy right now, and so I would, encourage people that they might have to go train with other people. Right. Because you have somebody like Matt, he's a big guy, you know what I mean? And he
does look pretty big.
Yeah, and he's a strong competitor. So like, how many people in the gym do you have that are his size, his level, that can really help him get to the level that he needs to be, or be training at the level that he needs to train consistently to be like a UFC fighter.
Yeah, he's got a fight coming up in March, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, UFC fight. He's going to be on ESPN, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And he's fought I think maybe 3 other times. He's fought
this will be his 5th fight.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So let me bring up somebody else here. Let's see. So this is one of your students, right?
Yeah, this is John D. He's been training with us since he was 9 years old. He's getting ready to turn 19.
Wow.
And
10 years.
Yeah, he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's getting ready to make his adult MMA debut this weekend, actually, 26th.
Oh, it's this weekend.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So when you see these guys, and, Matt has had other influence as well, but you've been an influence on them, right? A positive one. How's that feel? What are the emotions or the thoughts you have in seeing these guys do what they do?
Yeah, it feels good. I mean, I like to help people grow and excel in what they do. And with Matt, I feel like my main role with him right now is kind of like, I'm like, I don't know, say mental or spiritual coach. I just check in with him and make sure he's staying on the right track. I know, because there is a lot of corruption in these kind of sports, and it can lead to a bad place, and Matt's a good guy, and I like to, try to keep his head screwed on straight through all this stuff, So.
Sounds like that's a pretty awesome person to have around. So, wow.
That there's a scripture that says, bad company corrupts good character. And there is a lot of bad company to be had, in a sport like that. So, and that's kind of been one of my things throughout the years, where it's like, man, I really would like to be a good influence in a sport like this, but it is very difficult. You're outnumbered when it comes to just trying to approach a sport like this in a moral, healthy way.
Yeah, you're swimming against the current.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. So, yeah, one of the things that was really cool when I visited the academy, but and you can see obviously on the Instagram feed, is just all the different groups of people that are coming. Whether it's male, female, old, young. There's just, it doesn't seem like there's a demographic that's not involved, and that's really pretty amazing. And obviously, I think a great testimony to your approach to things. And so, here's. And I'll admit, I was surprised. I guess maybe I shouldn't have been, but there's a lot of things I need to learn. But there were women rolling with the guys and super competitive. Yep. So that's not unusual to see there. The women know what they're doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then this I thought was really cool, was this group. I don't know how old these kids are.
So that's our Little Warrior program. That's ages 4 to 6.
Man, that's super cute. That's awesome. So, So what are they like? Is that how often? How many times a week are they coming in and doing?
Generally, Little Warriors will train twice a week. We have the class 4 days a week,
Okay.
but usually they'll come in and train either Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday.
Okay. And then this group here, that's a little more rough and tumble group, looks like.
Yeah, that's our Saturday no-gi class.
Okay, they look pretty serious. And there's Mike in the middle there. So.
Yeah.
And then this one was encouraging for me to see, because I was like, all right, this might be a little more my speed here. Let's see. Some guys a little more my age, and they're doing their thing too, right?
Yeah, that's our Clinch Fit class. So that's like a fitness kickboxing class.
Okay.
So they're learning how to punch and kick and do all that, but they're not like sparring. It's more pad work, bad work, and just getting a good exercise.
That's pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, one of the things reason why I showed all those, to me, it's just a real testimony to it is community. It's like every age group you can think of, and normally, if you haven't been involved in martial arts, you kind of think that one group with the rough and tumble guys, like that's going to be everybody, and it's not, right? It's a lot of different people coming from different walks of life with different personalities. Yep. And again, I think that speaks to your abilities, because I imagine, like, I'd like to see you training like somebody who's competing versus maybe somebody like me. It'd be fun to watch, just because your demeanor has to change a little bit with different people, right?
Yeah.
Because they require different things, and so they'll be fun to watch. But I think
you definitely got to
really
push them harder.
Yeah. So how is I was going to say jiu-jitsu, but maybe broaden it out, because there's a lot of martial arts that you're very skilled in. But how has studying all those impacted you as like a husband and a father?
Yeah, I've always, since I was a little kid, I just kind of have had that, like, I guess, warrior mentality that I've always seen in the martial arts, and, that Bushido, basically, that Bushido code.
Yeah.
And, so I've always kind of had that view of it and mentality behind it. So I believe a lot in respect, and I believe a lot in treating others the way that you want to be treated. And then my Christian background on top of that, I have convictions, that, I want to be the best husband that I can be, or the best father, because I'm convicted to be so. I feel like I want to not only represent myself, but I also want to represent martial arts in a good light, in a positive light, and I want to represent my faith in a good light and a positive light as well. So all those things kind of put together, they all go together to me. They don't really, they're not separate. So I believe that martial arts, again, can be used as a training tool for all those things, because not every day do you really get to practice some of those virtues that you do get to practice in martial arts, because you're constantly goal setting and working towards those goals. You're constantly failing. You're constantly achieving. You're being tested over and over again. Yeah. You have good days. You have bad days. Pretty much every single time that you step on the mat, there's an opportunity to grow in respect, to grow in humility, to grow in patience, perseverance, all of these things, all these virtues and attributes. If you want it and you let it, that opportunity is there every single time. Yeah. In a big way. So,
I mean, I could see that. I think I read something that you wrote about that. I don't know if you use these exact words, but I mean, I can imagine, there's this dichotomy between, or could be a dichotomy between self-control or meekness, maybe might look like self-control, and courage, right? But if you're going to roll with somebody and do it well, those two things have to come together. Yeah. You can't have really one without the other if you're going to
Yeah.
do that well. You got to have the courage to engage,
Yeah.
but the self-control to do it so that you're aware of what's going on. And so, yeah, the competing or the training actually kind of forces you into that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And with jiu-jitsu meaning gentle art, that's always been one of my main goals is making it as gentle as possible. So even being able to compete with people at my level, but still my ultimate goal is using as little energy as possible and to make the jiu-jitsu techniques as efficient as possible.
Right.
And that mindset definitely is easier to take on as you're aging in jiu-jitsu, where it's like you don't want to go quite as hard anyway and you want to be able to slow it down and all that.
There's some benefits to it.
Yeah, but that process also, it's teaching you about gentleness, and being a gentleman, gentleman, So I think having that mindset can play over, obviously into everything else. And I believe gentleness to be power under control.
Okay.
So there is a lot of power in learning jiu-jitsu. It could be super violent, and you could really do harm to people and go out and do that from day to day if you wanted to, you know what I mean? Because you're going to have power to do that. But it's learning to keep that power under control and to keep growing in vulnerability at the same time that you're growing in that authority that you're gaining in jiu-jitsu. And I think that makes a lot of application to everything else that you do.
Yeah.
And I'll say to people too, like even when I'm teaching a fitness class, okay, you just did 60 seconds of jump squats, and I know 30 seconds in your legs were burning, but I told you had 30 seconds and you kept going, and I said 15 seconds and you kept going. You put a lot of effort into that. Right. So let's try putting that effort into your relationships.
Right.
And I know fighters
challenge them to transfer it to other arenas.
Yeah. And I know many MMA fighters who have the courage to step into the cage, but lack a lot of courage to have a conversation with somebody that they need to have a conversation with. Yeah. So I try to explain that to them. It's like, if you have the courage to do that, let's practice courage to communicate, it's, it's an important thing in life to learn how to communicate with people and to have those conversations that might be important, and so if we're going to practice courageousness, bravery, we can practice it here and here. Just kind of relating those things to life. That warrior mentality to step in the cage is the same warrior mentality that allows you to sit down and have a conversation with somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like in that training, like even if it's, obviously you're teaching people from a position of, knowledge and authority, but even if it was, two guys or two women training one another and teaching and rolling with one another, over time they earn the respect to speak into one another's lives as well, right? Whereas normally you're not going to let just anybody say the kind of things you were saying, like challenge somebody, like, hey, with your girlfriend, you're falling down here, but there might be a little bit more leeway there if you've earned that respect because you're training with somebody. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So what was it like, going through this pandemic with the business being what it is, which is obviously this physical, like you said, intimacy, you're really close. I know for me and a lot of people, I work behind a keyboard. And so we went remote for the most part. And, it was inconvenient. It was kind of difficult, but that was it. Kind of stopped there. For you and your wife, what was it like to go through this pandemic with your business?
Yeah, it was a scary time, at the beginning of everything. We just had no idea what was going on. And, we did shut down for what initially was supposed to be 2 weeks. Right. And it became more like 3.5 months for us. And yeah, that was a scary time. We kind of, I canceled everybody's membership once I realized we probably weren't going to be opening anytime soon, and kind of rebooted an online thing, which kind of just ended up being more of a fitness thing on Zoom. And, we did get some money for that, but not nearly as much as what we were making prior to the shutdown. And then even reopening, we knew it was just going to be awkward and weird, didn't know how to handle new people when they first came into the door, you know.
Yep. Every person coming in could be thinking a little bit differently than the next person that came in.
It was it was awkward. So it was a hard time, but, you know, we definitely bounced back from it. Everything's really good at this point, really strong, and we had gotten a lot of new members. It's kind of funny, you know, when we first reopened, we probably had about 30% of our previous members return. And then slowly more would trickle back in. But we still, you know, have a lot of members who trained with us previously who don't now. Really dedicated members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
So,
well, super happy to see you guys come through it and on the other side thriving.
Yeah.
So that's great. Great to see. So just kind of some fun stuff. You know, you mentioned you grew up in Frederick, right? So you've been around here for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, I've worked downtown for a little over 15 years, but I haven't lived here it's been about a little over 5 years. So I know, like, before that, there was a lot of transition and growth and stuff that's happened in Frederick. And so, just some questions about that. I'm curious, you know, from growing up here, what's really changed just from your perspective over the years, thinking back to when you were a kid and now, you know, in Frederick?
Yeah, well, there's certainly been a lot more development, because
Yeah.
I can just remember certain areas. Like I was saying earlier, we used to run down by the creek and there was like nothing there.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Now there's all kinds of restaurants and, you know, neat stuff. So
That's got to be weird. Kind of
yeah.
strolling along there as the creek, what it is now, and knowing you were just running, there was nothing there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of growth to Frederick for sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, growth is also going to bring varieties of different kinds of people, you
Yeah.
know. And so, you know, I think that's been you know, it's very artsy, you know, community in Frederick, and
Real creative.
really creative. Yeah.
Yeah. What high school did you go to?
Thomas Johnson.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I drive by there all the time. All right. Your family, like your kids, have they all been involved at different points in time at the academy, being taught by you?
Yeah, all the kids started in that Little Warriors program we just saw.
Oh,
you know,
did
at
they
age
really?
4, and
Yeah.
have been training ever since. So
Yeah.
Brayson's 15, and Bronwyn is 13, and Judah's 11.
Okay.
So they've all been training. You know, Brayson actually, I think, started when he was 3. Back then, I started that program for Brayson when he was 3 years old.
Yeah.
And then eventually I was like, we need to wait till kids are 4. There's a big difference between 3 and 4.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, they all seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so so your oldest is 13?
15.
15.
Yep.
Okay. So can any of them submit you at this point?
Brayson has submitted me one time.
Has he
Yes,
really?
yes, and he was really
talk
gunning
about
for
humbling
it, and-
experiences.
Yeah.
Sure, you weren't planning on that. You didn't pop him in the mouth afterwards,
no
did
pop
you?
in the mouth, no. I posted a picture of it on Instagram, and, you know.
Oh, did you?
Celebrated it, but I told him no more Mr. Nice Daddy.
Uh-oh. How long ago was that?
A few months back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it just kind of sneak up on you? Were you afterwards going, oh, wait, I think I know what he did. Okay, let's do this again.
Yeah, well, he's at a level where it's always a possibility. You know?
Right.
So I have to.
He's really skilled.
I can't be as playful. I have to be a little bit more serious, and
Wow.
I do have to pay attention.
Yeah, yeah. So is he competitive, or is he doing mostly
He's not a super competitive person by nature. He doesn't love competitions, but he has competed a good bit. And
Okay.
I mean, the last 4 or 5 competitions, probably he's won very easily. So he's very good at it.
Right.
His last competition, he competed. I think he was actually 14 at the time, but he had to compete in the adult blue belt division, just because there weren't enough competitors in his bracket at the time, and I kind of wanted him to do that anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, he ended up winning that fairly easily as well. So
That's great.
yeah,
Little proud papa moment.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So your academy goes. Is it is there a schedule, or how do you go out and compete? Occasionally, or how does that work?
Yeah, we're pretty occasional with it.
Okay.
We have competed more in the past,
Right.
and we're looking to kind of start doing that again.
Yeah.
After like COVID and everything, it just for us, that kind of slowed down. Even the clientele wasn't as into competing. So it slowed down a little bit, but we're looking to build that back up and get into a more regular competitive schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of your students are looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So when you're not teaching and running a business, which might not be a lot of time outside of that, but when you're not doing those things, in any downtime you have, is there anything like around Frederick that's, whether it's outdoor stuff, doing something, or downtown, anything that's kind of your favorite things to do?
Yeah, like our family, we like to go out to eat, downtown, go out to eat. We like taking bike rides when the weather's nice, ride down to the creek, down to the park, do those sort of things. As a family, that's a lot of fun. Last summer, we were doing some tubing on the Monocacy, which was kind of fun.
Yeah.
So we like to do like more active type things, or go eat some
Tubing.
good food.
Tubing's not real active. Once you pop that tube in, man, you're just stuck until you get to wherever you're pulling out. I love tubing.
Yeah,
because that's
fun.
like you drop in, you're like, well, this is what I'm doing for the next 2 hours, so I might as well enjoy.
Yeah.
So helps you kind of unplug a little bit. Any favorite places to eat? You said you come downtown. Any favorite?
We love Thai
restaurants or
food,
anything?
so we love going to Sumitra downtown.
Yeah, okay. Is
or
that
Kitty
your?
Watt. We like
yeah,
because
there's several good Thai restaurants.
Yeah.
So which one? If you could only have one, it's a Friday night, and you're really hungry. Which one are you going to go to?
Like we often get the pad Thai, which is good in both places.
Yeah.
Sumitra is often a little bit more convenient.
Yeah.
But then Kitty Watt has like this herbal chicken dish, which is delicious. If
Okay.
I'm craving that dish,
Okay, it just depends.
yeah, it's always Kitty Watt.
My wife and I love Sumitra, so that's our go-to if we want Thai.
Yeah.
Love their food. So yeah. Well, just want to thank you so much, for your time, and it's been really fun. I think I know I've learned a lot. Hopefully, our viewers and our listeners will learn a lot just from listening to the interview. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
You want to, tell anybody, that you have a lot of things going on social media. You want to share any of that?
Yeah, I mean, we're on Instagram, Facebook,
Clinch Academy,
just looking up
right?
Clinch Academy. Yep. On all those things, and my wife and I do also have a life coaching business that we had started called Wellspring Coaching Services.
Okay.
So that's more of like if somebody's interested in setting a goal, achieving a goal, or if they're stuck in a hard place that they want to get through. The life coaching is more about, overcoming and getting from point A to point B, basically.
Right.
Whether that be in life or in a business or anything like that.
Okay. Broader context.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do that. There we have Instagram account for that as well.
Okay, we'll make sure we put
Wellspring
those in the
Coaching
show
Services.
notes.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah, so you have YouTube, Instagram, I think, Facebook. You have your website. So there's lots of places people can find you, right, and follow. And it is fun following. Like I said, I think the Instagram is a lot of fun, a lot of neat pictures on there. See what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope it gave you a new insight into the talents, passions, and curiosities from Frederick, Maryland, and beyond. If you did, maybe you can help me out a bit. The best way for the show to grow in its reach is for you, the audience, to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your friends. Much appreciated. Until next time.